Although Abraham Lincoln is known best for abolishing slavery from the United States, if you look further, he mostly took a stand to keep the United States from falling apart into two different countries. Slavery did play a huge role in the breaking up of our country, but it wasn't Lincoln's main priority. In fact, he even said that he would do anything to save the Union, even if it meant not freeing the slaves.
Lincoln was born in Ogdenville, Kentucky on February 12, 1809. As a child, he loved to read, and his self-education made him a very enlightened man. Growing up in Indiana, Lincoln saw slavery as a boy, and having a better understanding than some, he realized how poorly they were treated, possibly being one of the reasons he wanted to be a politician. Sure enough, later in life, he became a persuading politician and our 16th president. But before all this, he had a rather unsuccessful beginning in his career. He tried to become a representative in the Illinois House of Representatives and soon quit his career only to restart to run for president. After he was elected, his quest to stop slavery caused trouble amongst the states, resulting in the Civil War.
When the slave-enabled states wished to break away from the Union to maintain their ability to own slaves after Abraham Lincoln suggested to abolish slavery, Lincoln did not want the Union to break up. The Civil War was started because they couldn't come to a compromise. The slave owners in the South made their slaves fight for them. They needed as much soldiers as possible in the Confederacy. After the war started, Lincoln said, "I would save the Union. I would save it the shortest way under the Constitution. If I could save the Union without freeing any slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save some and leave others alone, I would also do that." By the time the war was already well into itself, Lincoln only wished to save the Union, whether or not the slaves were freed. Abraham was very concerned with the breaking up of his country. Seeing how the Civil War was forcing brothers against brothers, family against family, and morals against Southern industry, he took it upon himself to fix his breaking country. The Gettysburg Address was a perfect example of how he was taking it upon himself to fix his country. He said, "407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation, so conceived and so dedicated can long endure." He was set with the task of rebuilding our country, emotionally and physically.
Abraham Lincoln never liked slavery, but that wasn't his main priority. What he truly did for America was keep our Union from falling apart. He demonstrated this change in this quote, "You say you will not fight to free Negroes. Some of them seem willing to fight for you, but no matter. Fight you, then exclusively to save the Union." What Lincoln is basically saying is that if you don't want to fight to free the slaves, then fight to save the Union. Abraham obviously still had slavery in mind, but the thought of our country breaking up was a much larger issue.
The Corwin Amendment was one of the largest setbacks between Abraham Lincoln and the ending of slavery. Not achieving its purpose of avoiding the Civil War, the law that the federal government could not meddle within states' domestic institutions became a useless obstacle in the way of ending involuntary servitude. Although it didn't matter in the end, it was an important step in the direction of the Civil War. During the Civil War, Lincoln searched for a way to repair the break in the country that the Civil War was producing. He also wanted to keep the Southerners just as American as they had been before. After the Union began to reclaim states, Lincoln had to appoint new governors who could maintain peace within the state and not allow it to be retaken. But the largest task he faced was the reorganization of the country. Northern states wanted to regroup and gain land. Abraham also had to figure out a way to help the South still own its land and rebuild itself after the devastation of the passing Civil War frontier. But the emotional aspect was perhaps more important than anything else. He wanted to rebuild his war-torn country, not alienate those who were involved, and make up for the losses of life. Perhaps no man could do this, for it takes much time to fix emotional injuries. But Lincoln tried his best to mend the wounds that laid in every corner of our country.
When the war was still in action, some of the slaves had already left the South due to the Underground Railroad, which was run mainly by people from the Union and former slaves. Lincoln began to make the 13th Amendment when he was campaigning for the 1864 election and brought it into action during the Civil War. But what exactly was the 13th Amendment? The 13th Amendment would make slavery and involuntary servitude illegal in the United States, which means that all slaves would be free. The House passed the amendment on the 31st of January, 1865. Lincoln was very proud of this and mentioned the amendment in his latest speech. He said, "But this amendment is a king's cure for all the evils."
The Civil War finally ended in the spring of 1865, but this did not mean that the Southerners were happy with losing their government, the war, and the ability to own and use slaves. But in a way, the Southerners did have a right to be angry. They had lost their way of life, and many people who were in the cotton industry went bankrupt because they had no workers to work on their plantation farms. Even though the African Americans were free from slavery, they still weren't treated the same as white people, and they were very economically disadvantaged. The way Africans were treated so many years ago can, sadly, still be found among some individuals who believe that slavery was right and that it should have been kept. After the Civil War finally ended, Lincoln went out to Ford's Theater with his wife to watch a show and take their minds off the sadness they felt after the Civil War. John Wilkes Booth, an actor who lived in the Confederacy, believed that what Lincoln did was beyond his power. Because of this hatred, he planned to assassinate the president. Sadly, he finally succeeded after several attempts at doing so. Lincoln's death was a huge tragedy for the Union, but Southerners had a more positive opinion about it. Within a few months, Booth was captured and killed. For Lincoln's righteous actions, he was given a monument in Washington, D.C. after his death that had the famous Gettysburg Address written within the walls of the monument. Lincoln is known today as one of the most influential people to ever take a stand against slavery in the United States. If it weren't for him, then we may have been two countries.